Two middle-aged guys try to work it all out. Two middle-aged guys try to work it all out. Two middle-aged guys try to work it all out.
Hey everybody, welcome to Two Middle-Aged Guys Trying to Work It All Out. T-Mag, we're trying that out.
Yeah, T-Mag, two middle-aged guys. That's kind of what we were going for, and it seems like a good abbreviation, just something to throw out there. Maybe it'll become a hashtag someday as we keep working on our social. But yeah, we'll see how that goes and see how people react to it.
Last episode, you probably heard Chris had asked me a question, and I had the wrong answer. Chris, do you remember what that question was?
I believe you're referring to, have you seen the Oppenheimer trailer?
And my answer was no. And that was objectively, by any measure, the wrong answer. As a Christopher Nolan fan,
yes,
I should have been on top of that. And I think that I am interested in every Chris Nolan movie. I was slightly less interested in this one at a point because it was about a historical person, right? It was not going to have that sort of mind-bending roller coaster that Nolan usually leads us on. Or at least I expected that it wouldn't. So I said no, but that I would watch it, and that we would talk about it on our next podcast. So real briefly, I watched it on the big TV with the sound and all that. Wow. I mean, it looks like he's doing a new thing, is how I would describe it. This doesn't look like your usual Nolan. I saw a little bit of Paul Thomas Anderson in some of those shots of when they're setting and Cillian Murphy's got this strange sort of, he's lit different than how Nolan lights things. I'm not sure who the cinematographer is. Did he go back to Wally Pfister, or is this the guy who's done his last couple films?
I don't know. I'd have to look that up, actually.
But there's something different there. There's even one, I'm going to say this and do not laugh, but there was a couple of outdoor shots. I think maybe that maybe there's like a football field or something like that, where I was like, there was a little bit of almost this Wes Anderson sort of color pop and framing that it looked like Nolan was doing a new thing, and I'm along for the ride. So I'll be there, opening night. It looks great. It's the effects, that sort of I'm going to create a nuclear weapon explosion with practical effects.
Well, he recreated the atomic bomb, I hear.
Millions died.
Yeah, made them fire it off because he's that detailed.
Yeah, that detail. He's going to get he's going to The Hague for war crimes. Christopher Nolan. Crimes against humanity.
But it was all for the film.
All for the film. So I think it'll be fine. He'll probably get acquitted.
In all seriousness, the look that you were talking about, one thing that really stood out to me that I can't wait to see how it plays out in the final film is the mix of black and white and color.
Yes.
That was really interesting and has been done in cinema before to very high success. And so
Well, you're referring to Kill Bill 1, where they did it to
other films as well. But so I'm very interested to see how Nolan plays with that. And if I'm not mistaken, 100% shot IMAX. Is that right?
I don't know.
Okay.
He does. I mean,
well, he's been building up to
that.
But
yeah.
I think if I remember right, reading Oppenheimer was 100% IMAX. So that'll be amazing to see.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, and you were right to make me do it, even though I was in because it was Chris Nolan.
Sure.
But I had some trepidation just because I love his original thought. Right, these the crazy ideas he comes up with.
Yeah,
we're getting into our Chris Nolan episode, folks. No, this is not a Chris Nolan episode.
No, although one is coming. But the last thing I'll say is, at almost every turn when they announce the Chris Nolan film, I'm always like, eh. And when it gets here, I'm always like, best film of the year.
Yeah, it's I'm ready. That's a get me in the theater movie. Agreed. And they're getting harder to find.
Yes, they are.
The streaming, I'll just wait 6 weeks. It's going to show up on Peacock or whatever anymore.
That brand new Dungeons and Dragons movie is already on Paramount Plus. I couldn't believe it. Is it?
Yeah, I think I saw that when I logged into Paramount Plus, and yeah. By the way, are you on Max now?
I am not.
What? Oh, you're HBO Max. It stunk. Now it's Max, and it's awesome.
Yeah, well, that's what they tell me.
It's the same. It's the same. But more expensive. It does have some of the Discovery content pulled in. Yeah. It had enough of the Discovery content that we're actually going to cancel our Discovery Plus. But no, but back to the whole theater thing. Yeah, why bother anymore,
True.
right?
Yeah.
Especially if you like your home theater setup. Ours is just perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Then, there are very few films that become theater experiences. Chris Nolan's theater experiences.
Yeah.
So,
Well, he'll be glad to hear you say that.
well, I know he's listening. Sea Dog.
That's what you call him?
That's what I call Chris
All right,
Nolan.
that's
Sea Dog.
good.
We're on. We have nicknames for each other. That's just the thing. We're crazy like that.
That's great.
Also, I'd like to just tell our listeners that the T-Mag Studios, but email us, tell us what you think about T-Mag. T-Mag Studios is a mess today. I'm hoping that actually creates a better. What if this is the best sounding episode we've ever done? The acoustics
Right.
in the
perfect.
studio are just perfect because
do not move a piece of laundry.
there's laundry and yeah, it's maybe we should not record in a laundromat.
I mean, it's a pain to take out the dryers and the washer sounds.
It
but
is.
It comes out okay.
It's worth it. It's worth it
absolutely.
because it smells great. It smells like laundry.
Yeah, I mean
Detergent.
that Gain smell. Gain Fresh.
The Gain smell.
Sponsored by Gain, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
If you need fresh laundry, use Gain.
Yep, they clearly could be sponsored by Gain.
I-
If they're listening,
I'm willing to read any copy for money.
I'm assuming it's Procter and Gamble.
I don't know.
I don't know who makes Gain.
They were sponsors. They just heard us say we don't know, and now they're out.
Yep, all the listeners are gone. Well, Chris, I hope you had a good week.
I did.
I think we talked enough. Let's just get into it today.
Sure.
I do have a little game for you, though. I want to.
Okay.
Before we get into it, I guess I should say let's just do a little game.
That's not getting into it.
Yeah,
Let's
this
do
is
the game.
just a trivia game. It has nothing to do with the topic.
Trivia. All right.
This is just music trivia.
Oh, okay.
So here we go. Question number one. There's 5 questions here. We'll go fast. Question number 1. This 1965 hit single by Sonny and Cher spent 3 weeks at number 1 on the Billboard Top 100 and sold more than 1 million copies. Can you name that song?
What is I Got You, Babe?
Yeah, that would be correct. Ding, ding, ding. All right.
Do I have to answer in the form of a question?
No, this is not Jeopardy. In fact, you get it wrong if you do that. So,
all right.
I'm going to let that one go. I didn't specify that up front. Okay, question number 2, the next one. This one-hit wonder duo's Song of a Sad Future, set in the year 2525, hit number 1 on the Billboard Top 100 in 1969. Can you name the duo?
Ziegler and Evans.
Well, you added an L. It's Zager.
Oh, is it
Evans,
Zager?
yes,
Oh,
but ding, ding, ding. Can you name a movie that song was featured in? This is a bonus question. Has nothing to do with the...
I know I've seen a movie that has that featured in it, but
It's by the director of Napoleon Dynamite.
was it Gentlemen Broncos?
Gentlemen Broncos.
Yes.
Oh, you get bonus point. I'll give you an extra check mark for that because I thought I was the only person who had ever seen that movie.
Have you seen Don Verdeen?
I did.
Okay.
I did.
Okay.
I
See, because I
bought Don Verdeen.
I thought I'd want to up you with the next film.
I own Don Verdeen.
I do too, actually. Carry on.
Okay. Yeah, the Don Verdeen episode's coming, folks. 1966, Simon and Garfunkel released this song, their first number 1 hit. I know you love Paul Simon.
I do.
How do you feel about Simon and Garfunkel in 1966?
Sound of Silence.
Ding, ding, ding. All right.
Big fan.
Yeah. It's a beautiful song.
It is.
All right. Second to last, I believe the penultimate question is coming your way. This alt-rock duo originally told their fans they were brother and sister before admitting they were actually once married and then divorced.
That would be the White Stripes.
That is correct. And may I ask, are you a fan of the White Stripes?
I do like the White. Yeah, and I like Jack White going beyond the White Stripes as well. I find him a very interesting artist.
I can't stand him. So you lose that point. It's that one. It's nothing to do with the music. It's that weird little deal that they did. I don't understand.
I agree.
It is off-putting.
I agree. That's bizarre. I don't understand it either. But he's a fantastic guitar player.
I guess so. So was Hitler. No, he wasn't.
That's not substantiated.
I was reading some tweets from Kanye.
That was not in Jojo Rabbit.
It was not in Jojo Rabbit. That's your source of truth. Last question. The last question. The most difficult question of all here. One-hit wonder Buckner and Garcia released this song describing a fictional medical condition. It was their one hit. It was released in 1982. What is this song?
Fictional medical.
A fictional medical condition. A medical condition. I think I kept saying condition, which is not a word. That might have thrown you off. A medical condition that's not real, but they made it up for this song, which was a hit. Buckner and Garcia.
I know when you say it, I'm going to be like, of course, but I'm going to have to call this one. I don't know.
Well, the song is called Pac-Man Fever. And you know who else has Pac-Man Fever?
We do.
That's right, we do. And I tricked you. I said nothing to do with the episode. I got you. That's right. So, folks, what are we talking about today? Arcade memories.
Yes.
Arcade game memories beyond just the arcade.
Yes, but specifically 2 arcades and a gas station.
And a gas station and a bunch of stuff around it. But the 2 arcades and a gas station. I think really we're going to find that it's more like 1 arcade, a gas station, than another arcade that we have to mention because it did exist in our city.
Well, you know, I have 2 specific memories tied to the lesser arcade, so we'll get to it. But the arcade in question, the big one in our lives, was Aladdin's Castle.
Aladdin's Castle. But I thought, before we go to Aladdin's Castle, I thought we would go back to the very, very beginning and talk about 1971 computer space.
Sure.
And the coin tray.
Yeah.
I'm just joking. Everybody's told that story. That is so played out. That is ground oft trod. We will not go there. I kid. Aladdin's Castle. Let's go.
Yeah. So Aladdin's Castle started in 1969. Let me check my notes there. 1969 was when they opened the very first one. It was originally called American Amusement Incorporated, started by 2 brothers, Jules and Merrill Millman. Now, I'm sure with your reference to the coin slot or the coin drawer, you probably know this as well. But when pinball started, pinball was not a wholesome activity.
No, it was like viewed like almost like gambling.
Exactly right. And
but
it was
Jules and Merle.
Yeah,
they brought it into the mainstream.
They loved
with
it.
names like Jules and Merle. Could you trust? How could you not trust?
Well,
Jules
in fact, people did not trust them because they created this company and they specifically targeted shopping malls. And I thought that this was really interesting and really brilliant. They thought shopping malls are going to bring a different kind of clientele. So we can bring these games into shopping malls. We'll get rid of the whole gambling kind of attitude.
No one gambles at a shopping mall.
Precisely right. And the other thing they figured was that a shopping mall would have their own security team.
Very smart.
Yes, very smart. So they tried to sell this idea to shopping malls, but shopping malls were not having it until you come to the Dixieland Shopping Center in Harvey, Illinois, which was a shopping mall that was not on its best leg, let's say, and the owner of that shopping mall would take rent money from anybody. So that was where the first American Amusement Incorporated location opened. And from there, it was a rousing success. Families loved it, and word spread, and shopping malls across the country, at least to the tune of 20 shopping malls.
Was that an indoor shopping mall, Dixie
it was,
Square?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I knew that they had become,
and
they'd starting to come into their own at that time.
And it is not there anymore, and it is the scene in the Blues Brothers where they drive through the shopping mall. That
is Dixie. Okay.
That's it, yeah.
I love malls and movies.
There you go.
Go back and figure out where they are.
So now you know. But after they got 20 locations, the brothers decided that was pretty good. So in 1974, they sold Aladdin's Castle to Bally Manufacturing Company. And Bally ran Aladdin's Castle through most of the 80s. And finally, in 1993, they sold to Namco. But at its peak, there were 360 Aladdin's Castles across the country, which makes me hope that some of our listeners are familiar with Aladdin's Castle.
Everybody has got to be. You think about the 80s, and then even in the early 90s, right? It felt like there never was a death. There was never a decline for these arcades. They just died one day, right? One day you woke up and they were gone. But I have so many great memories of the Aladdin's Castle. And I will say this. I also, I'm fairly certain that I remember it as being massive, and it was probably not as big as my memory. It was canaverous, right?
So we
cavernous, canaverous. That's not a word.
We've made up 2 words today.
Yes.
So it was pretty big. You know, if you think, and I'm going to nerd out on our mall location here for a little bit, folks, so I apologize if you're not from here. This will mean nothing. But it was 3 conjoined storefronts.
Yes,
at its
it was.
prime.
At its prime.
And
you had an entrance
pretty
to the
big.
food court.
Yep.
You had an exit on like the other. It kind of like wound around the food court.
That's correct.
If you just think about your food court as a as a horseshoe, right?
Yeah.
And then you had on one side you could enter and go into something outside the horseshoe, which is Aladdin Castle, and you kind of came out at the tip of the horseshoe, right?
Exactly.
Oh boy.
No, that was fantastic. That
Was it?
exactly the way it worked.
Several of our listeners have writing letters, angry letters. I'd be glad to get one.
Sure, I'll take an angry letter. But in the middle of that horseshoe was a Sbarro's, which is significant because no matter where you were in Aladdin's castle, it smelled like pizza.
It did, and you would touch the controllers and the buttons, and your hands would slide off of them, and that's how they got the revenue, because you weren't able to play.
Although in games like Centipede, that was actually helpful.
It could be able to have a little grease on the wheel, or on that ball,
track ball,
track ball, great memories of Aladdin's Castle. Let's talk about the other arcade.
Okay.
And then let's kind of focus on arcades for a bit. There's a few others I'd like to talk about, and then dive into memories. But our other arcade, we had 2 malls in our. Technically, we had 3. The third mall was a disaster. It was the.
What was the third?
The third mall was next to the Walmart, the South Oaks Center. It had like 1 store, 2 stores, and then the gravel floors throughout the rest of the mall. Bizarre.
I never even called that a mall.
It was technically, but we had our good mall, which is still exists today, and then we had another mall. It was called the Northtown Mall, which I have wonderful memories of. And it was an attempt, and for years it actually it functioned, right? For years it had stores. It was an attempt to put a mall on our north side of town. The reality is that the city that we live in, Springfield, Missouri, is not large enough, was not large enough then, certainly is not large enough now even, to support 2 malls. But this North Side Mall had a connected Walmart. It had a grocery store, a little local grocery store. It had many, many stores, including the most wonderful comic book store at its earliest phase, called Comic Empire, that you could possibly imagine for a kid to go into.
I remember the day that opened.
Yes, and I remember going in there, and I remember calling them to ask them questions about stock, to the point where they told me to stop calling, and so I would disguise my voice.
I bet that fooled them.
It did not. I believe the lady said to me one day, "You're holding your nose. You are the same guy who keeps asking if we have Firestorm 100, or I don't know." Anyways, that has nothing to do with an arcade. The arcade, though, there was an arcade there, and it floated around locations throughout that mall. The mall had a small food court, but the arcade was called Fun-Attic.
Yes, it was.
And it was not a great arcade, but it was an arcade.
It was a third of the size of Aladdin's Castle.
Roughly, yeah. Yep.
And it didn't keep up its games as well as Aladdin's Castle did.
A lot of games from like Wish.com. No, I'm just dead.
So yeah, it was kind of a crapshoot what you were going to see when you went into Fun-Attic, but that did not stop me as a child, if my parents happened to be at that mall, from trying to bum a couple of bucks and spending an hour in there.
Yeah, I remember playing Berserk in there in the early 90s, which is, that's not a game that you played in the early 90s.
No.
It was a very first generation home console level type, even the arcade experience. But that's the kind of mall it was, right? The games are still a quarter. It's not like you got a break for the crappy games, but it was a very interesting mall. It was an interesting arcade. We have a good friend. I won't say his name, but who used to work there, and I meant to interview him for some stuff before.
Fantastic.
Yeah, we're just to get, but I forgot. He worked through college there. There was a college, Evangel College. Now that I say that, you probably know who the friend is. Yeah. And up the street from the mall, and he would work there. And he said it was a very easy job, and I gotta believe it was a super easy job. But Fun-Attic, it was great. But I think that the point is that our town had 2 arcades, and during our period of growing up, that was it. I mean, you could go into, I guess if you want to go back, we did have a Showbiz Pizza, we did have a Chuck E. Cheese. I have memories of going into them, but I don't remember them, right? Other than just I know they were there.
And to me, in my mind, those were always ancillary. Like there was Aladdin's Castle that was top, and then there were a couple of games at Pizza Hut, there were a couple of games in convenience stores here and there, but I never thought of even Chuck E. Cheese. I never even thought of it as an arcade. It was like, oh, they got a few things. So to me, there was a clear distinction.
They did have, I remember the one thing they had, I can't remember if it was at Chuck E. Cheese or Showbiz, and they combined to become one entity, but they had a great light gun what do they call them? Clay shooting game.
Oh yeah,
On a massive like 200-inch screen.
Yeah, it was
right?
like the B game of Duck Hunt.
Yeah, but it was a massive.
And it had like a real rifle.
You had like a real rifle, and and I do have a distinct memory of that. But really, when it comes to arcades, Aladdin's Castle for us
was king.
And you know what? I'm guessing for anybody listening that lived near a mall, that's probably the case.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, since then there have been bigger arcades that have developed, especially in bigger cities. But in the middle of the '80s, I don't know that there was a chain bigger than Aladdin's Castle.
I don't know if there was or not.
Yeah, so I'm going to give it to Aladdin's Castle.
Yeah, and certainly that's with our experience, right? So the Aladdin's Castle. Did you ever have a birthday party there or go to a birthday party there?
No, I never did.
Yeah.
I didn't like attention.
Yeah.
So I never had the birthday party at Pizza Hut or McDonald's or anything like that. It was always just at my parents' home and with a few close friends that I would handpick. So I was not a big birthday person.
But I remember you'd go into the Aladdin's Castle and you'd be super dark, right?
Yes.
I mean, it was just dark, and then the glow of the screens was the lighting, and then someone would open a door, and it would be this bright white room with the kid's birthday party, and you'd look into it, and you'd be like, what's going on in there? And it just, it's a cake and pizza. It's not like they got a special arcade machine. But
no, and I always wondered if they got free games, and the answer is no. You had to pay, like there was a certain amount per kid.
How did you know that?
Just research. Like,
okay,
yeah,
all right.
I found this. I apologize. I should have noted the website because it was filled with information about Aladdin's Castle, including this guy's journey to the last Aladdin's Castle, which was a great blog post, a great read. I'll put a link to the website in the show notes.
Absolutely. I'll check that out myself.
Yeah, no, it was fascinating. But he even had like some of the brochures for like advertising the birthday parties scanned and posted and stuff like that. So yeah, it was really interesting. So internet research for the win.
Yeah. Who's the guy? Was this guy named Jafar? He just got sued by Disney.
That's clever.
Yeah, well, it was
Disney
clever.
Doesn't own, unless you specifically quote.
They don't own.
They don't own Jafar as an entity.
You do know that the Aladdin story is actually a Chinese story, not
Arabian?
Not Arabian.
I did not know that.
Yeah, well, there you go. Learn
Okay.
something new.
Yes.
I hope that's correct. I believe that it actually is correct.
If we're just making up stuff.
Just making up stuff.
Like, did you know the Little Mermaid was Canadian?
Yeah, no, she's real, and she's actually in Parliament, Canadian Parliament. So Aladdin's Castle. Let's get back to let's talk about the games.
Sure.
And here's a bit of my problem. I do certainly have memories of games, but there's so much there that it became very easy to forget what was fun. Right, or what you played, because everything was great, right?
So,
and you could sample everything, even if usually I went in there and had $5 for the quarters, which I think if you bought 5, didn't you get an extra $1 free? Isn't that how
there was something like that?
There was something like that,
but you had to convert. They wouldn't take quarters. You had to convert to tokens.
You got to tokens, yeah.
Yeah, and this is going to mean absolutely nothing to our listeners, but I have Aladdin's Castle's tokens that I brought to show Dave.
Oh.
And then here's one that's not in special wrapping.
Well, this is folks. I'm going to grade them here in real time. These are really cool. That's my grade.
Now they're circulation grade, so there's nothing too special about them. But.
Very cool. What I dig about them, I'm sure that this is functional, and I'm not joking. Is they've got a strange sort of they're not round. They're of round shape, but they are not perfectly round. There's kind of sides to them, like an octagon essentially, right? And maybe that's why the quarters got trapped. And they're also smaller than a quarter.
Yes. And that whole idea of using tokens instead of quarters was to keep their money. Yeah. I mean, if you put in $1 and you got quarters out, you could walk out with those quarters.
You walked out. Yeah. You made change.
But
basically.
I was the only one that walked out with tokens.
Yeah. You did not keep those, did you?
Not from the day. No, I got those from eBay. From a particular day I was having nostalgia. And I have one that's got the original Aladdin's Castle branding before they sold to Bally's. And then the other two are the Bally's years.
Wow.
And I do not have a Namco one, but they do actually have an Aladdin's Castle token with the Namco branding. It's got Pac-Man on it as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So you had to convert to tokens. And I'll add to your statement about you kind of forgot what was good. And I'll say in the heyday of our Aladdin's Castle, from week to week, you would go and they would have new cabinets. And not only would they have new cabinets, but they would have arranged all the old cabinets differently because they wanted the new stuff to be front and center and to be kind of like draw you in. So every time I would go, I'd put in my money, get my tokens, and then I would be in a desperate hunt for the games that I wanted to play. And that was always part of the adventure for me. It was, well, where did they put Atari Star Wars this time?
Yeah.
You know, that kind of a thing. But it was
with the sit down.
Yes.
Did they have the sit down there?
They had both.
They had both. Okay.
And I was small enough at that time that I would stand up in the sit down Star Wars.
Yeah.
And if the sit down Star Wars was being played, I was mad because I wasn't tall enough to use the cabinet Star Wars.
Why would you want to play the cabinet Star? I mean, let's be honest. The sit down is the only way to do it.
It is certainly. It's the only way to do it unless you're 43 years old, and then it's a bit of a squeeze.
It is a bit of a squeeze. It is a bit of a squeeze.
But it was the reason I say that about the rotation of the machines is this was huge. I mean, this was a big business.
It was a big business,
and I mean, these machines are not cheap.
They're not cheap.
Thousands of dollars for a game, and they were getting, 10 new games weekly.
But think about that. That not only, admiration to the company who does that, but that means somebody was producing arcade games at an incredible rate, right? And that was the reality of the 80s and even the early 90s. Tons of arcade games were still being made. The home video game, craze and the arcades were battling it out, right? And but there was still enough interest, and certainly in the late 80s, where the arcades were they were still putting out cabinets.
Absolutely. And it was kind of a thing when we were growing up it was always the home consoles playing catch up to the arcade. Because the technology in the arcade would rotate faster, it would get better, and you'd play a game in the arcade, and you would just think to yourself, "Oh, I hope this comes to NES."
Right, and I hope it's right. Is like Contra. Like, okay, I'm playing Contra here in the arcade. I hope that it is as good at home. I'm Russian Attack, and I'm whatever.
Yep.
You can Shinobi is an example of one that never quite got there, and it was always pitch perfect. Yeah, Shinobi is one that the Sega Master System version. Still is a lot of fun, but nothing touches the arcade cabinet, Shinobi.
Absolutely true. And I mean, in our time, we saw everything come and go from the Star Wars arcade game, like I mentioned, to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle game. Do you remember the X-Men game with 6 players?
I absolutely remember the X-Men game with 6 players. And that was also, they did a Simpsons. I believe it was a 4-player Simpsons. But yeah, the X-Men was in that Ninja Turtles beat 'em up style.
Konami, that category that they had in the late 80s. But man, I remember seeing that 6-player machine across, I want to say 4 monitors. I may be wrong about the number of monitors, but it was massive.
I never got to play that. I played the X-Men beat 'em up at Walmart in the airlock, right? Remember the airlocks that covered the full front part of the store?
I do.
Basically, more or less. And they would put, the vending machines were in there so you could get a Coke without getting rained on, the little quarter machines, bubble gum, and then they'd usually have 2 back-to-back arcade machines, and one of them was the X-Men machine at the Walmart at the Northtown Mall that had the same that little arcade. That was far more advanced than any of the ones, but I never got to play the big one at Aladdin. There was always a line. I mean, that was the thing, right? The cool games, there was always a line, and generally there'd be some really good players that could keep going on a quarter for a long time.
Yeah, no, but it was amazing, and we grew up at the perfect time to where I think we probably played every game that came through.
Definitely.
I mean, it was rare that there was one I'd look at and wouldn't even give it a single token chance. And there obviously there were some I liked more than others, and so what? I mean, I've already mentioned Atari Star Wars. What stood out for you?
I got one game. I'm gonna have one game that has got a sentimental attachment with it. APB, All Points Bulletin, which I don't know. I should have looked up the maker of that, but it was a game where you're basically a police car and you had a steering wheel game. It was a standing cabinet steering wheel game, and you had you would chase a car and you would drive through the donut shop type thing to get power-ups. You would chase the car, and once you caught the car, then you were tasked to find another car. Top down, tiny little cars. It looked roughly 16-bit. But whenever I would go to Aladdin's Castle with my older sister, we would play that, and it was a great game. We had a lot of fun. So it was a very sentimental. It stuck out to me. The other that I will say is, I'll ask you a question.
Okay.
I view, and I could be wrong in my view, but I view that the arcades of the 80s in particular had three big games. And those were Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, and Galaga. And those came out at roughly the same time, 80 and 81, actually. Those all came out, which very, and I think that drove arcades for years, those three games and the spinoffs that come from them. Of those three, which one's your favorite?
Of those three, Galaga.
Absolutely mine as well. So that was the other game. Every time there was a Galaga machine, I would find it. So and that's one you could usually find open because everybody was gravitating towards something that was newer, which was great. I loved those as well. But I loved Galaga, and I could play it. I still can, right?
Yeah.
When I go to Chuck E. Cheese, there is at our Chuck E. Cheese here, which has really almost no arcade games. They do have a big screen Galaga, and I will play it with show my girl. I think it's actually got a trackball, which is not a bad way to play Galaga.
That's interesting.
I absolutely love Galaga. So, Donkey Kong is okay. I find it frustratingly challenging.
Yeah, I agree.
Pac-Man, I am not a big Pac-Man fan. I do think that Miss Pac-Man is a far better game, and I can play it longer. I think it's just more balanced, but it's just not... Single screen games, generally speaking, have never not been my cup of tea. But Galaga is and it's a progenitor, Galaxian, and then I believe what inspired it was Space Invaders, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's all three in the same. Absolutely. I believe it's all three in that Namco world, right? If I recall correctly,
all connected.
But yeah, so I would say that All Points Bulletin and then with my sister, my older sister, I loved to play All Points Bulletin and then Galaga, which when my older cousin taught me the two spaceship trick in Galaga, I thought that I had just broke the game. Like, oh man, I wonder if these other people know about this. Is this something only I know now, or
they're gonna come get me?
Oh yeah, it's a secret. So much fun. You mentioned the smells of the arcade.
Yeah.
It did smell like a pizza place, right?
Yeah, like Sbarro's.
Like Sbarro's, which is sadly gone as well. Just like Aladdin's Castle is gone from our mall. I think it's disappearing all over the country.
There's, I do some travel for my job, and I see Sbarro's more often than you would think.
In the airports, they're still in the airports. I was in an airport, and I believe I walked by Sbarro's.
But sadly, Aladdin's Castle is not. My gosh.
Yes.
How many planes would I miss?
Yes.
But, one of the big memories I have from Aladdin's Castle is just growing up. I don't know why, but it felt like my parents were at the mall every single Saturday. And I can't imagine that they were doing that much shopping. But it was just like that was the thing that we did on Saturday. We went to the mall. We'd often have lunch at the food court. I'd beg for $3. They'd give it to me. And then I'd spend that at Aladdin's Castle while they went off and did their shopping. And in my brain, it is a weekly occurrence. So this was a big portion of my growing up and my childhood. And it's where I got a knowledge of games, really. I would play a game and I'd be like, oh, Rampage. That was that monster game. That was cool. I wonder if that exists on Nintendo. And so then I go to a rental store and see if I could find it. And that was my way of almost like getting video game news, because like websites didn't exist. Sure. Magazines at that time didn't exist. And it was just like, what crazy...
Well, they did exist, but you had no way to get access to them.
So I'm talking really young. I'm talking like 84, 85.
Okay, all right.
And they didn't exist at all. Of course, 84, 85, neither did Rampage or Nintendo. But...
well, Nintendo did.
Not in the U.S. But that ramp up,
120-year-old company, Chris.
Okay, that's fair.
You're not that old.
They made.
You're talking about 1784 and 1785.
That's right. That's when we made our own video games. By golly,
hand-hewed PlayStation. Out of wood. You don't like it?
These graphics are phenomenal. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, it was such a big part of my growing up. I don't think I could put into words how influential it was for me to go to Aladdin's Castle.
I loved Aladdin's Castle. I will say that I have it was absolutely fun. I did not get to go nearly as much as you did. So Aladdin's Castle was in the mall by the food court that was anchored by Sears. When we went to the mall, we very rarely ventured that far, for we stayed on the other side of the mall.
You were Montgomery Ward's people.
We were the Montgomery Ward's people, because my parents had a Montgomery Ward's credit card, and they couldn't shop anywhere else. Apparently, that's a thing. So I didn't get to go as much as you did. I went with you a few times. I went with my older sister and my older brother, I can recall, on occasions. Unfortunately, by the time I got a car and had, was mobile, had wheels, I say mobile, like, yeah, I wasn't able to walk at the time. But then Aladdin's Castle was gone.
It was, and it did, like you described it earlier as there one day, gone the next.
Yes.
Because I was there so often, I watched it disintegrate.
Did you?
And I remember it going from 3 storefronts to 2 storefronts.
I do remember that, and because I believe they shut off the food court entrance, right?
No, it was the exit on the other side.
It was the exit, which that became the Hellsberg jewelry store.
That's correct.
And they left the food court entrance.
Yep. And then the middle section that connected those two, that went. So that would have been the section directly behind Sbarro's.
You know what? I actually, now that you're saying this, I'm having memories of seeing this. I would walk through and be like, oh, it's smaller. They've ruined it. And then I didn't care. And
by then also, I mean, we're talking PlayStation 1 in 64 days.
Are we?
I feel like...
Yeah, let me tell you why it's not, because I'm pretty sure... Well, maybe it was. I was going to say, I bought my wife and I got our engagement ring at Hellsberg in 97. So Hellsberg was there in 97. So it was disintegrating in 97. So that could have been...
So yeah, I mean...
I was thinking it was gone by then, but perhaps...
It was on its last leg.
It was on its last legs, which is probably true of arcades...
everywhere
broadly. Yes.
Yeah. And because really that was the generation where home consoles could keep up.
Yes.
And
it was close enough.
Yeah.
And then you didn't have to pay a quarter at a time.
Exactly right. And the big games at that time were the fighting games, which were a lot easier to get on home console accurately. And so it, even though it was a sad experience for me watching this place that I love disintegrate, the writing was on the wall. There was just no question. The consoles that I had at home were every bit as good. And then what happened was, to try to survive, they shifted from video games to like what I would almost call like event things, where it was like, you get in this giant box and it's like a 3D roller coaster kind of thing.
Awful at the time. Technology wasn't there at the time. It's even bad now, I think. I mean, it's just... You still know you're in a box.
So if you didn't want to play Virtua Fighter or ride a roller coaster, they didn't have anything left. It just had disintegrated.
I do remember playing Virtua Fighter there. I'm having memories of that, going in to that food court entrance and basically a Virtua Fighter being there. I also remember a Quake arcade cabinet being there.
I don't remember that.
Yes, I do remember that, which is not a game that I played just because I was so bad at those style of games. Right? They made a Quake arcade. I haven't made this up.
No, you haven't.
Yeah, I'm occasionally known to... I'm very sure that I saw that.
No, they made a Doom and a Quake arcade cabinet, which is very awkward because neither of those games play well with a joystick.
I was about to say...
but they do exist.
They didn't have a keyboard and mouse?
No. It would have been better off.
Oh, yeah. I loved Aladdin's Castle, but my arcade game memories... of games that I really loved outside of Aladdin's Castle. So I am confident that outside of a Walmart was also the first time I played Ninja Turtles. One of my most memorable, I don't think it was the first time I played Mario Brothers, but it was the first time I got to play it at any length, was playing Super Mario Versus at a Pizza Hut before I owned a Nintendo. I had an Atari 2600 at the time. The year was probably 5th grade, 1987 or 88, something like that. I did not own a Nintendo. And at the Pizza Hut for a school field trip, if you did I believe it was Book It, the reading program, you had to read,
read 100 books and get a personal pan pizza.
Yes, or pretend to read 100 books and get a bizarre, congealed, greasy, circle-shaped pizza thing. It's that gummy and undercooked with a slice of pepperoni or two if you're a good kid.
Very lucky.
Yeah, but it's I do recall it. But I remember having $2 in quarters and playing them all in Super Mario Versus and having to wait my turn to get in and just absolutely if I had this at home, I would never leave. I would just
there'd
play
be nothing else.
And then eventually, when I did get Super Mario Brothers, I kind of proved that out by just playing it for hours and hours at a time. But that was a fun arcade, outside of arcade game memory that I think it would have been maybe, I don't know if it would have been different in an arcade. That one, maybe it would have been better in an arcade. But what outside of arcade game memories, outside of arcade game memories do you have? Boy,
Yeah, no,
put that on a t-shirt.
let's not. I have some really strong Pizza Hut memories, just like you were alluding to. Because every time we'd go to Pizza Hut, they would have 3 or 4 arcade games in the corner, and it was great because we would order the pizza. I'd beg a few quarters off my parents, and by the time I was finished with the games, the pizza would be there. I didn't have to wait for it. It was great. And the ones I specifically remember there is one, that was the first place where I had experienced one of the tabletop arcade games.
Yep. I exactly the same thing I was thinking.
Yeah, which is a crazy design. To this day, I'm not sure I like it.
I don't. It's very bad for your posture. Yeah. I mean, that's not a joke, right?
No, it really is.
It's uncomfortable. What they call cocktail.
Oh, that's
table
right.
games.
Cocktail games. Yeah. And Arcade 1-Up, who I'm sure we'll talk about later, but they do make models that are just like that.
Yes, they do.
But that was the first experience I had, was at a Pizza Hut with one of those, again with Galaga. So I remember playing that. The other thing I vividly remember on Pizza Hut is the Play Choice tin cabinets.
Oh, I do. I remember that as well. I remember seeing that. We went to Pizza Hut very rarely. We were Pizza Inn people.
Oh yeah, they didn't have the games. They had a jukebox.
They did have. They did. One of the locations did have 1942, and I think that's it.
Yeah.
But and I remember playing it there.
Sure.
Fun game. You lasted about 8 seconds, but
believe me, if it was a game and we were around it, we played.
We were going to play it, right? Yeah.
But the Play-Tin Choice, for anyone who's not aware, was 10 Nintendo games, and it was a literal Nintendo. The hardware for what you would buy and have at home, and it would have 10 different games in slot. You'd put your quarter in, you would choose which game you get. And what I always thought was cheap about it was you'd have like 3 minutes to play.
Yeah.
And I was like, come on, I put my quarter in, let me play until I die.
Until I die. Yep.
So I was never a fan of Play-Tin Choices. And especially as I got a Nintendo and started building that collection, then I was like, I got this at home. Right. What do I need, this for? But that's a vivid Pizza Hut memory. But the biggest arcade game, not at an arcade, was the earlier alluded to gas station that we talked about.
Oh, yes.
Because there was a gas station, and I cannot remember what it was called.
I don't remember what it was called. It was in a very, very bad little stretch of town
at
the time that has become somehow worse.
Yes, it had. Despite all of the Springfield renovation that's been happening, they haven't touched that street at all.
Touched that street. I was going to, before this show, go visit that gas station. I did not get an opportunity to. However, I did Google Map it, and I realized that some people can't read maps. I can't read Google Maps, which is a big problem. I'm looking on the satellite trying to follow from, I remember that I was like using a Dairy Queen as my North Star. Like if I go down from the Dairy Queen, I did eventually find it, and it's still a gas station.
It is. It's a different company, but it's still a gas station. But what was significant about this gas station is my parents stopped there one day for gas, unassumingly, and we went in, and there was a new game there that neither of us had ever heard of. And again, like I said, if it was a game and it was around us, it was going to get played. And we put quarters in, and we played, for the first time, Street Fighter 2.
Yes.
And I don't know what your thoughts were the first time, but immediately I could feel this was a brand new type of game.
Well, my first thought was, I've never played Street Fighter 1. Am I going to know what's going on?
Well, that's true. The story is quite deep.
It's quite deep. No, I remember thinking, this is the greatest thing I have ever played. And I remember asking to go back to that gas station to play that game. I mean, we were just ate up and hammered and
because
whatever.
As strange as it was, I don't know why that gas station had Street Fighter 2, but it had it before either arcade in the city.
You gotta, I have no idea, but there is such a thing as test machines and test markets.
Sure,
it could have been
maybe.
I mean, I can remember playing through the characters, but I remember getting stuck on Chun-Li. She was, and I still, to this day, if I fire up Street Fighter in any iteration, she's in it, I play as her because she is. He's very easy to control character, and her special moves I can remember.
Yeah, it was just an amazing game, and like you alluded to, every time my parents had to get gas, I begged them to go to that gas station, so I could play Street Fighter 2.
80 cents more a gallon. We won't make our house payment, Chris.
Like, I don't care. I gotta play Street Fighter 2.
Oh, fine.
So
the boy loves his Street Fighter 2.
And eventually, my parents got wise to it, and they'd only give me one quarter because I started to get good at the game.
Yeah, you take it longer.
And and they didn't want to have to just sit there and wait for their child to come out of this gas station. But finally, Aladdin's Castle and Fun Attic got a Street Fighter 2, and then my parents could get gas wherever they wanted to again, and all was right with the world. But I mean, to explain how big of a deal Street Fighter 2 was to me, I would, when that game hit, and we would do our weekly mall visits, all three of my dollars went into Street Fighter 2. Yeah. There was nothing else. I remember Mortal Kombat came out, and I was like, "It looks pretty." I played it once. I was like, "This game sucks."
This game's right. I am definitely not a Mortal Kombat person.
Yeah, and back to Street Fighter 2.
But it had blood and fatalities.
Now, visually, it was apart from Street Fighter 2. It was a smart move from a game design perspective.
It was.
To say I'm going to differentiate myself in the industry. Yep. But Street Fighter 2, no question, the better game.
Mortal Kombat originally was going to be a Jean-Claude Van Damme game.
Yes, it was.
Yes. And they ended up not getting the licensing, and then they went a different direction. And it's good that they did. But Jean-Claude Van Damme did get into the street fighting world by starring in
Street Fighter
as Colonel Guile, right? Or as I used to say it, Ghoulie, because I didn't know. I mean, I didn't know what that word was or how to pronounce it. But the best thing about it is that you had a terrible movie, and then they made a video game adaptation of the movie based on a video game using Mortal Kombat technology.
Yes.
It was absolutely horrible.
It was. Completely unplayable. Although perhaps the most reasonably priced game for the Sega Saturn, if you're collecting for that today. So I guess that's a good thing. But I mean, I played Street Fighter so much that when Fun Attic, the one on the north side, got a machine, I would not eat lunch, and I would have my grandmother drive me there after school so I could play Street Fighter 2. And I think this is the first time that my parents are learning that fact. So that's just, I mean, I was so obsessed with this game. And then finally it came out on Super Nintendo.
Yes.
And I was, not only was I willing to trade basically every game I had to earn enough money to be able to buy Street Fighter 2 on day one, but I did trade almost every game I had. And for a while, it was like Street Fighter 2 and Mario World were the only Super Nintendo games I had, but I didn't care because I played the crap out of Street Fighter 2.
It had incredible replayability, whether you were playing against the computer or a human opponent. And the great thing about those sorts of games in general, but I think most fun in that game, was that if you had 10 friends come over, every game was totally different because you played different characters with different styles, and it was a very social game, right?
It was.
Because not only did you enjoy playing it, you enjoyed watching others play it, which is a mark of a incredible video game, right? If you can watch someone else play it, and I'm not talking about the play with me type stuff that are done now, which I don't want to get into that, but that's not my cup of tea, generally speaking. Unless somebody's playing it's really funny, and they're doing their shtick along with it, then I'll play along then. But those were the sorts of things you sit around, everybody's like taking turns, you'd watch them play, and you'd be like, I never thought about that way to kick that person while they're flying towards you. And
not only that, but Street Fighter 2 introduced the idea of the special move.
Yes.
And so then it was like, how did he throw that fireball? What? I've never seen that before. And then, you'd hope to get that guy's ear long enough to be like, how'd you do that, man? And he'd be like, down forward punch. And be like, oh, okay, down forward punch. And then you'd practice that for 16 million times the next time you got
and
to
eventually you'd get it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Fits and starts, it would come out.
To this day, if there was a way to measure, I would bet that Street Fighter 2 is my number one played video game.
It's not for me, but I would imagine that definitely it could be up there for many people. I got a question for you. The home versions, we also played the Genesis version. Putting them next to each other, which one do you prefer?
I prefer the Genesis version.
As do I.
And mostly because of the controller.
The control pad. I also thought it was a little bit more responsive, although less ugly. It was probably the blast processing kicking in and giving it that punch it needed.
I will say, however, that the audio is worse on the Genesis
version.
That's
a common thread, and I have to admit, I pay little attention to that because I usually... Boy, blasphemous for some video games. I've usually got music playing in the background and something else going.
Yeah,
and I was listening to the Doors.
While
like most kids in the early 90s, listening to the Doors, playing Street Fighter.
I'm with you there. But I still play it to this day, and currently my favorite way to play is the Capcom 30th anniversary Street Fighter collection.
I have that.
It's very good, and even though my son can whip me up and down Smash Brothers and Guilty Gear and pretty much any other game you can name, whenever we break out Street Fighter 2, he has never won.
My son does beat me. I do beat him occasionally. I get accused of button mashing when I do win, and I'm not. And the more modern games, I most certainly am button mashing.
Sure.
But Street Fighter actually,
there's strategy,
and I know what I'm doing, and I'm just, I can hang on Street Fighter. Nothing, and I could probably hang on anything in that 16 to 32-bit type world.
Yeah.
But once you go beyond that, and then like things like Injustice, which is a wonderful game, but I mean, I just, I'm my problem with that game, I want to get on a tangent here, is that I keep getting my comic book knowledge gets in the way, and then I demand that Dr. Fate be able to beat everyone. And
Joker would never be able to do that.
He got a big hammer in this one, or a flower that shoots acid? That's ridiculous. Back to the arcade.
Yeah.
Street Fighter, absolutely one of the most memorable arcade games. If not the most memorable. I do have. I love Galaga, and to this day will still play it. So simple and clean. And I also love Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I think, though, that I preferred the home version. It's inferior in every technical way, but for some reason, the control pad just felt at home.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, because that arcade game did find its home on the NES.
Yes.
A severely underpowered system compared to that arcade cabinet.
Yeah, absolutely.
But an excellent conversion. And one that took the limitations of the NES and really worked in it and delivered a game that did not look similar to the arcade game, but an experience that mimicked the arcade game.
Yes, with a little bit of flicker.
Well. Very well.
A little bit of flicker every time an enemy would be on the screen.
A little bit of slowdown.
A little bit of slowdown. But it was still a lot of fun. And I think the control pad added something to it that, and that's always been my thing with arcades is some games do better with the arcade stand-up cabinet, and some just demand the at-home control pad. Contra, for example, cannot play successfully. I'm really not any good on it in any context, but in an arcade, hard.
There are some really bizarre outliers out there. Like, I don't know if you ever played Bionic Commando in the arcade.
No, but I know it's different.
Very different.
Yeah. I loved that game on the NES.
Oh yeah, it's great. But there were some odd ones like that would kind of feel like, oh, I wonder how did the home version become better than this one?
Gauntlet at home, if you had the 4-player thing on the NES, which we never did, but we did play a lot of 2-player Gauntlet, and I did really enjoy it. I think that in the arcade, the few times I played it, I found Gauntlet sort of demands, it's a quarter eater, right?
Yeah.
And I never had enough quarters. Yeah. So, you can kind of take that into the experience. At least at home, you got to really try to get as far as you can without, being anything more than the $30 you paid for the cartridge or whatever it was.
Exactly. And I mentioned Rampage earlier. There's no way you're beating Rampage at the arcade. But you put the time into it, you could beat that at home.
Don't like that game.
Really?
Yeah. It's one of those single screen games that just does not do it for me.
I enjoy it. It's mindless. But I find the idea of it very smart. Like the idea of, oh, hey, let's make you the monster destroying the city. I think that was a clever turn.
It is, right? Play the villain is I just think it just was not a fun game.
All right, so single screen games. Now you got me thinking. Root Beer Tapper.
Root Beer Tapper? I don't think I've ever played Root Beer
really?
Tapper.
Okay.
Yeah, or the original version, which was just Tapper. Just Tapper, right?
Where you were slinging beer.
And taking kids down the wrong road, that game was. Yes. Thankfully, Barks came in. Barks
cleaned it up.
Cleaned it up. They sponsored the whole thing and got some kids in AA, and they did good.
But I tell you, I've never been a better bartender than when I've been on that game.
Yep.
Off-Road, remember that game?
Oh yeah, that's a fun game.
Yeah, single screen.
It is. I said it's single screen. Okay, all right. I'm just, it's, listen, Galaga's in there, right?
That's
and
true.
I don't like shooters, and I don't like single screen,
But you
and
like
yet I
Galaga.
like Galaga. So there can be, I'm open to those experiences. It's just generally speaking, they don't work. Part of that though is I had an Atari 2600, like I'd mentioned before, and I had a massive amount of games, and I don't want to get into it too deeply, but I played it a lot, right? And I may have just kind of burned myself out a little bit, so that might actually play into it. Or that I experienced some of those single screen games first on the Atari 2600 in inferior forms.
Yes.
And never gave them their full chance at the arcade.
Yeah, the 2600 is a hard system for me to go back to. I owned one as well. And really, there's only one game that sticks in my mind that I really enjoyed. And everything else I just found confusing.
What game is that you can't leave us hanging?
So it's because I played it with my cousin, and it was hide and seek, which is a dumb little game. And in fact, in the instructions, it says have player two shut their eyes.
Okay.
While you go and hide your character, and then
I thought you were going to say Pitfall.
no,
said hide and seek.
I mean Pitfall's probably the most advanced game on the 2600. And
it is one of the most, or it was the biggest leap.
Yeah, and it is legitimately fun.
It is legitimately fun, and I beat it. I got to the end, the final boss. No, I didn't. No, it's impossible. I just love people making it. Me and my Canadian girlfriend beat Pitfall last week. Then Randy Travis came over for dinner. That was in the 80s. That was everyone's dream. I just described the late 80s. But there is a connection between Atari and arcade that you can't, because
Oh, yeah.
I made that computer space joke. But that was Nolan Bushnell. That was Atari in 1971. Putting a machine in a bar, a prototype that just moved video games forward. And there's Pong, and there's all that stuff. And then there's the question of, did he steal there's a bunch of history there that I could care less about. But that experience, unfortunately, it's gone. In the mall, Aladdin's Castle, which is our North Star arcade.
Yes.
You go in there and one day and it's gone. It's been sealed up. They're putting a
Chinese
Pan
food
Asian
restaurant,
Chinese,
yes.
or whatever that's called. I gotta know, because they put that in there, right? And there's got to be like a cavern back there, right? So the way the Aladdin's Castle was built, they put the Chinese food place there. They blocked it off. But I'm still wondering if there's an Aladdin's Castle back there, right?
So it's one of two things, right? You either have to know the code word to get through the Chinese restaurant, to get through the games, or you go there and it's like Raiders of the Lost Ark, where you're peeling back the spider webs and there's just tons of
drinking
arcade
Kali's
cabinets.
blood.
Yeah. That was Temple of Doom.
Oh, okay. Well, you're right. That was Temple of Doom. Sorry, but so they disappeared, and there has been an arcade or arcade experience resurgence, right? We see them in retro arcades.
Yep.
We see them in like barcades, which are retro arcades where they serve alcohol. I guess it's kind of the same thing. We see them in things like the 1-Up machines.
Yep.
And then there also is a modern day arcade experiences that are very different, right? But they're designed to be things you can't do at home. They're usually like interaction things, like the Dance Dance Revolution. And I realized that was a 20-year-old thing. But stuff like Guitar Hero started out as an arcade game that then found its way home.
There's a ton of like what are essentially light gun games, but they're such events.
Yes.
Giant TVs, spaces that you walk into, guns that you handle, that kind of thing.
So that social thing still does exist. Unfortunately for us, in a mid-sized market, college town area, and I live in the rural part of it, right? I'm not, I'm even further out than you are.
Yeah.
We don't have access to that here.
We have 1984.
Well, we do, right? I was talking about the new stuff.
Oh, the new stuff.
Yeah,
Sure.
the new stuff. So there is still that, and we can talk more about that. But we do have a retro arcade.
We do.
And it really is good. I mean,
it's phenomenal.
There's just really like no shade on it.
No,
I do actually have a complaint, and we'll get to that. But I think you'll know you'll respect.
Well, I say kudos to them, because when they first started, it was a little bit frustrating because you'd go in and a joystick would be broken or something like that. They've really made great strides to clean it up. Everything's operational. Yeah.
They create a vibe. They've got this cool like basement area that's supposed to look like a mid 80s, early 80s type basement. Yes. A rec room type feel. with tons of retro arcade games. But the downfall of that place is simply that they refuse to put 90s arcade games in it. And it's so easy. Just put a Back to the Future section.
Sure.
You know, you can do, like, hey, look, we're stepping into the future to play Street Fighter 2. That's all I want.
Yeah.
Just that one game. Put it there, guys. Make sure to not put the circle control buttons. I want the normal arching 3-button configuration, not one circle. Not the pie chart.
Agreed.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't even understand that.
No.
The Mortal Kombat guys came up with that to sabotage.
Well, for anyone
Put
listening,
that in there, Street Fighter, dude.
for anyone listening, there was versions of Street Fighter that had the buttons arranged in a circle, and it looked like a complete Trivial Pursuit pie, is what it looked like. And I've often wondered if that was like somebody's repair job, like that wasn't an official Capcom thing, and that was just something we ran into.
I saw it enough.
Did you?
Yeah, I saw it enough that, I don't know, listeners, email us.
Let us know. Did you have a weird pie Street Fighter 2 controller?
Jim Capcom at home. He's retired now. He doesn't want to get back in, but he's get brought back in on one last mission to correct T-Mag.
Yeah.
On their assumption that the pie chart buttons.
He'll come on. He'll be like, I didn't know anyone remembered Street Fighter 2.
Yeah. He's chopping wood right now, and I can't get back into this.
They keep pulling me back in. But yeah,
looks just like Liam Neeson too.
Oh, wow.
Retired, but he's one last mission.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the phone call, he dies. Oh,
that's so sad.
But he saves the cat.
Okay.
But yeah, that's my one thing about retro arcades. Is our particular retro arcade is that they have got a 1984, and they are strict. Sort of. They do have some 70s cabinets in there. So
yeah,
you know,
I think it's just they want to stop at a certain point.
They do. But there's a way. Listen, if you're listening, guys who own it, and I actually, I believe I know one of the guys who owns it. If you're listening, put a Back to the Future room with some future games. Throw some 90s stuff in there. You'll be rewarded with more people coming down and playing your games.
Would be
it's
awesome.
like it's $7, $8 or something, $10. I don't know. I can't remember what it is.
It's
all you can play.
Yeah, last time I was there it was $5. It was all you can play.
Oh, it's gone up.
Has it gone up?
Yeah,
Inflation. Darn it.
No, I've gone since post COVID.
Yeah.
And with my son. The one thing I will say about that is we'll go and after about an hour we're kind of exhausted, and I can only play Lunar Lander so much. I love that game.
Yes.
Lunar Lander so many times. But yeah, so the retro arcade is the thing. Every mid-sized city, in fact, even in Ozark, there is a tiny little retro arcade I've never been into. But they've got pool tables, pinball machines, and like 12 retro cabinets. My son told me. I'm gonna guess they're MAME machines that have been, I'm gonna guess that. But which to me, that's. I think a MAME experience at home is fine, but if I'm going to a retro arcade, it better be legit.
Yeah, I completely
legit hardware. It can be reconstructed cabinets. I totally understand but you better have the system boards that are the real deal.
I agree.
And the old CRT monitors. Yeah. You can't fool. So speaking of trying to reproduce that, you got One Up, which I listen. I respect One Up. I love what they've done. I do. I look at those machines. And here in T-Mag's studios, I will say I have tried to figure out how I could put a One-Up machine in here. Of course, it would be Street Fighter 2. But there's just simply no room between the laundry and the desk. And
so this is how much my wife loves me, and she'll appreciate this shout out. I have 2 One-Up arcades in my living room.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's because we have absolutely nowhere else in the house to put them. And I've told her many times, I'm like, do you want me to take these to storage until, a future date where we actually have a place? She's like, no, they're fine. They're in the living room. I swear when we're sitting watching TV, I'm staring at the One-Up arcades more than I'm watching whatever's on the screen.
What do you have?
I have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Oh, of course.
And I have Star Wars.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You have, does Star Wars also include Empire?
And Jedi.
And Jedi, okay.
Yeah. But I don't care because those 2 games suck. And Star Wars, Atari Star Wars is one of my absolute favorite games of all time, despite how simple it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a perfect game. They have never made flying an X-Wing feel more like flying an X-Wing than that vector graphics game.
It is a lot. It's clean.
Yes.
It doesn't try to do too much.
Yeah.
It did the perfect amount with technology available to bring that experience. It is still playable to this day. I'll go to the retro arcade with my son, and he'll get in that cabinet and he has a blast because it's a good game.
It's so good.
It's especially fun in the cabinet when you kind of get that you get that
cockpit feel. And One Up did do a cockpit version.
Did they?
That's not the one I have. That one was
I don't
way
think
more
your wife
expensive.
loves you that much.
No, so I've got the stand up one with the riser, and I got the Ninja Turtles one. So Star Wars was my first dip, and when they did a Star Wars game, I was just like, well, I can't say no, because replicating that game at home, extremely hard.
Yeah.
And my one complaint with Arcade 1-Up, I think they're a little expensive.
Yeah, I wonder how much licensing also. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that, especially with the properties they're dealing with.
I'm not saying they're overcharging. I'm just saying I wish they were $100 cheaper.
Yeah, because it's a value thing, right?
Yeah,
you're just the value ratio just feels a little off.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would love to have one. I follow a YouTuber for video game news. I'll give him a shout. It's RGT85. Absolutely love it. It's Retro Game T is what it stands for. And he has his like every YouTuber does. He's got the let's walk through the game room, guys. Like, oh boy, but he's got just his normal game rooms. That's cool. But he's got he calls it the RGT arcade.
Yeah,
and it's all arcade. It pretty much owns every arcade one up, and I'm like, that is so cool.
If I could, I would do it in a heartbeat. But I dipped my toe in with Star Wars because I knew I had to have that game, and then I was just stupid lucky, and I found Ninja Turtles at Walmart for discounted to $200, and I was like, no question.
Yep.
And then,
even if you didn't like it or didn't work out, you could resell it and not lose a penny.
But at that time, interestingly enough, the Arcade 1-Up cabinet was the only way to play the arcade accurate version of that game at home. It had never seen a home release except for once on Xbox 360 arcade.
Yep.
But they've, again,
unfortunately,
digital versus
a lot of
physical.
Stuff, a lot of stuff on the Xbox 360 arcade.
Is gone.
Like the Wii shop, the WiiWare shop is gone. That's really interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah. So now that they have the Ninja Turtle Cowabunga collection, it's got the arcade game on it. So I can't make that claim anymore. But still, I mean, my kids and I have played. It's got Ninja Turtles and Turtles in Time on it, and my kids and I have played it, tons of times. And even, occasionally now, still, my daughter will come up and be like, "Let's go through Ninja Turtles." Be like, "All right."
Does it hold up like the controller and everything?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot of wear and tear on those controllers.
We haven't had any problems with that. I know that with maybe like the first iteration of 1-Up arcades, there were some complaints about that. They are super simple to work on. It's not a big deal. If you do lose a button, you can get a replacement and rewire it. No big deal. But I haven't had any trouble with any of my 1-Up arcades.
And that, that's bringing that arcade experience home. Does your house smell like Sbarro's?
No.
I love Sbarro's, actually. When I tell people that, most of the time they look at me like I'm insane, but it's delicious.
It's got nostalgia to it.
It does. It has got the right amount of like grease and salt. I mean, it's just that perfect. I love it when you get it on the plate and then the plate is soaked in grease and the pizza falls on the floor.
And then you get those people that like try to soak up the grease with napkins. And it's like, what are you doing?
What are you doing? Give me that napkin. I'm going to wring it out over my pizza because that's the yes.
But yeah, so Arcade 1-Up, that's a great way to have the experience at home. Like, you talked about MAME earlier. I completely salute the MAME guys for keeping these games alive.
As I do all emulation.
Yeah. Very important to be able to access those games. And you plug in an arcade stick into your PC and you've got a pretty good experience. And then I think the only other option you really have for arcade games is when they port them. On the Nintendo Switch, they've got they've got the arcade archives, which are great. A lot of them focus on Neo Geo arcade games, bringing those to consoles. But they've starting to branch out and do other arcade games. Love to see that kind of thing.
You mentioned that just real quick, Neo Geo arcade games. I never enjoyed many of those. They were not my cup of tea. King of the Fighters.
Yeah.
Right. That SNK world. Yeah.
They did do too many fighters. And
did they do anything else?
They actually did.
I know they did, but it's. Fighters are to Neo Geo what shooters are to TurboGrafx-16.
That's exactly right. Now, I will say that the hole in my collection is Neo Geo, and I am sad that I don't have one. But collecting for it is the only system that has continually just gone up in price. It never had that point where, you can pick these up for a song. It
wasn't like the Jaguar where it got dirt cheap for a while, and now it's back to being unattainable.
Like Neo Geo was always unattainable.
Yeah.
And so,
But yet I knew everybody at school knew someone who had
a
oh
Neo
yeah, man,
Geo.
he's got a Neo Geo in 9 games.
Yeah, and it's like, sure he does.
And they're like $1,000 each.
Yeah. But what I have done is, you know, I mean, through MAME and through other avenues like the Switch eShop and that kind of stuff, I have really tried to dive into Neo Geo's library because it's a hole in my knowledge and I didn't know a lot about it. And there are a lot of games that are really worthwhile. And I think top of that list for me are Metal Slug.
Yeah, that is
those are
that's
some
part of their
crazy
non-fighter games,
Yeah.
and they're also beautiful games for the technology at the
Yeah,
time.
absolutely they are.
Yeah.
And so I'm not a fan of King of the Fighters. I'm not a fan of Samurai Showdown. I'm firmly in the Street Fighter 2 camp, as I think everybody now knows.
Yes.
But the Neo Geo collection that are not fighters, there's some really good stuff in there, and it's not that well known. But it's worth diving into.
Did you do at any of the arcades and some of the more modern experiences? Have you done any of the more physical things like the DDRs or the VR experiences that they're bringing to them?
I've done some of the VR experiences. I've done some of the. There was a big Halo light gun shooter that was in the arcade. Had a chance to play that when we were in
a VR game.
No, it's not VR.
Oh, okay.
It's just it's a cabinet that you stand in.
Oh, it's a stand-in. Okay,
Yeah.
I've seen a sit-down Halo cabinet.
Yeah. That's got like the turret guns on it.
Yes.
Yeah. So they have another one that's more like a marine thing.
Okay.
But I played the turret one as well. So that was fun. I've done those kinds of experiences. Way back in the day, like 1996, I did the VR with the pterodactyl that flies. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I probably have heard of it, but
pterodactyl. I can never remember the name of that game, like Pterodactyl Attack or something like that. But it was the first big VR experience. And this is like Lawnmower Man VR technology. Yes. So you were in the thing and you were in the pod that surrounded you and you could walk and you got one shot and you could shoot one of the other players if you needed to, or if the pterodactyl was attacking, you could shoot the pterodactyl. It was not fun.
I may have heard of this. It doesn't sound fun.
It was not.
Did it make you puke?
It did not.
Okay.
And now it was neat being in the world. It was neat turning my head left and right and having that movement reflected back at me. But the game was not fun.
It's not fun.
You know, I have the original PSVR, and there's some really cool experiences there. But that's not. I feel like the really good VR experiences are at home now.
Yeah,
they're not out in the arcade.
They're so good that someone like me who gets motion sick is able to play them. In certain contexts, I still can't play all of them.
Skyrim VR is the only VR game that made me motion sick.
Oh, I never played
and
that.
It put me down for hours.
Ooh, really?
Yeah, it was not good.
I had some VR experiences at Universal Studio, the theme park, that kind of combined that VR and the movement of a ride. So let's put you into a VR like a headset, or put goggles on or something. It'll make you somewhat nauseous, and then let's throw you around. And make you super nauseous, and then you walk back out into the 95-degree heat.
You know, I find that in VR experiences, if the game has me in some kind of a machine, like a race car or an X-Wing or something like that, that does not make me motion sick because my brain's like, oh, well, you're
in a machine.
Yeah,
you're used to that. You drive
yeah.
cars,
The VR games where you're walking around, I'm like, oh this is not good.
I can totally see that. But I think that carries on the arcade tradition in a sense. I wonder. I've often, this is in America, right? In Japan, they're huge. They still have arcade centers. I believe they're called Gessen or Gessen. I'm sure that a user, please email correct me. Just let me know you're out there listening.
We just want emails.
Yes, but they're big game centers. Gessen, I believe, means game center, and they're really big. And Sega's got their big things too.
They are dying.
They are dying,
even in Japan.
Did COVID kill them? That was going to be where I was going to get to. It's like, would it? Did COVID like kill all of the social interaction, and now we're all just in our homes? So
the biggest Sega arcade in Tokyo closed.
Okay,
and that was tragic and sad. So there are still a few, but they're dying. I mean, they really are. And even in Japan, I would say there's the greater focus on retro stuff than there is new experiences.
I hear that there's some great retro game stores.
Yeah, and like for whatever reason, Street Fighter 3 really hit in Japan. And so you'll go into an arcade in Japan and you'll just see rows and rows of Street Fighter 3 machines that are connected so that the ones next to each other can
Is
be
that Alpha?
versus.
Street Fighter 3, is that Alpha or?
No, Alpha was the weird thing between Street Fighter 2 and Street Fighter 3.
Yes.
So 3 is its own game, and in my opinion, 3 is way superior to Alpha.
Okay.
All of them pale in comparison to 2, but that's a different story. So yeah, I mean, and I'm speaking like I know and I've been there. I've never been to Japan. I've never been to Tokyo. I'd love to go someday, but just what I read online and what I see in the Japanese gamers that I do follow, it's dying, and it's heartbreaking that it's happening.
I did not know that. I knew they were big there. They're certainly, even dying, they're probably still more there than there are here.
But speaking of the experiential, I mean, they get some wild sounding arcade games. Like they have one game, I'm dying to play this game. I would love to find it in the US at some point. But the whole point of the game is there's a plastic table in front of you that's set for dinner, and you're watching this event unfold on screen, and at the appropriate time when you would get angry, you're supposed to flip the table. And then how well you flip the table and how well everything goes crazy is how you get scored on that game. I'd love to play that game. And then it's all on wires, so after the level, like the table just comes back in front of you and it's ready to go again to be flipped. And what a great idea for a game. Or
it's very clever.
Or the big drum game. They do have ports of this at home.
Sorry, about the one for the Wii?
So it did exist on Wii.
Like Mambas or something?
No, not that one. No. That's the shaker game.
Oh, okay.
Why can I not remember?
Is it a Donkey Kong game?
No, that's GameCube. That's the paddles.
Okay, all right.
Donkey Konga. Why can I not remember this game? It's a Japanese game. You're playing the big Japanese drums. The good home conversions come with a tiny little drum that you can beat on. But in Japan, the arcades are the giant, massive drums that you're playing a rhythm game to. Well, that would be a great experience to have too. But most of these don't come to America. And then you got crazy stuff like just on YouTube a couple of days ago, they found the old Japanese Castlevania arcade game that had a whip control with it. To where you would, you're standing, again, it's like the big light gun shooter type thing. You're in the pod, and you have this essentially a Wiimote, and you're doing whipping motions to fight the skeletons and everything. And so they just, there was maybe 4 of them in Japan and 4 of them in the United States. And somebody finally got the board and was able to dump it and released it on PC. So now you can play it with a mouse, kind of doing the whipping motion a little bit.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
To me, that doesn't seem as, it'd be really interesting to see. It doesn't seem quite as fun. Maybe it's just because I'm just extremely lazy. I mean, maybe it's just,
It's different. Those types of games are not fun in the sense of games we grew up with.
Yeah.
Whereas you and I could play Galaga or Street Fighter 2 or Star Wars for hours and be totally entertained. These kind of new arcade experiences, they're trying to go for that. We're going to, first of all, we're going to charge you like $2 to do it.
Or more.
Or
more, yeah.
And it's going to be a 10 to 15 minute experience, and it'll be something to talk about.
And it's something you possibly, you could not do at home, although with Quest and, the PS VR or whatever, and the PC stuff, and I'm not a VR person, because it mostly makes me want to throw up. Not like, I think it's disgusting. I think I just get super motion sick.
Yeah, I get it.
Although it's better. But I think with those things, it can bring those, experiences home, right? And that's the reality of the arcade, is that unless you love the arcade culture, now you can do almost everything at home, or they're located in like these entertainment centers that are not arcades, right? So, for example, we took our kids to a trampoline park. There's a handful of arcade games and that sort of thing. We live near Branson, Missouri. There's places like that where you can go, and it looks from the outside like, oh, that's an arcade. You walk in, and you're like, there's no arcade games here.
Right.
It looks like an arcade, but the interesting thing is that kids still call them arcades, even though they're not necessarily recognizable to us. That's not bad. That just means we have to go to the retro arcades because we're old people, and that's what we get.
Exactly. And I think the real tragedy of the arcade is if it's a game that comes out on PlayStation, I don't worry about its longevity. I know there's somebody out there that's watching out for it and is going to preserve that game. But these arcade experiences, not a lot of people know they're out there to begin with. Yeah. They don't know they need preserving. the people who made them, they've made their money off of it. There's nothing else they can do with it.
Right.
So it's just going to get destroyed and lost forever. I mean, like the Castlevania game I mentioned, I didn't even know that existed until somebody was like, "Hey, we finally dumped the ROM." I'm like, "Yeah, ROM of what?" So then that encouraged me to go read up on it. I was like, "Oh, that's amazing."
I read a story recently about a Michael Jackson arcade game.
Moonwalker?
No, not Moonwalker, but a post Moonwalker arcade
Really?
game.
Okay.
It had some like digital cutscenes of Michael Jackson, and I think it was made around the time of the Dangerous era, and think there was heat on Michael Jackson. They ended up pulling out of it, but they were able to find pieces of the code in the video. Actually, I read an article, I heard about it on a podcast. So that sort of detective work. Figuring out those things existed, and some of it's the devs working on it who realize like they weren't hiding anything. They just probably didn't know anybody cared, right? Realizing that they care, and then saying, hey, this existed, and maybe they've got the code somewhere, or ROM, or video, of it. But it's really interesting. I could have went anywhere with it. There's a Michael Jackson game, went to some elaborate, ridiculous joke, but that was real, right? There was, and I'm sure that there is dozens of examples of things that either it didn't get released or did get released on a limited basis, and that we could say
there are big Star Wars games that they did that were event pieces like that. You can't find those anywhere now. And if a property like Star Wars can't even guaranteed that it's going to stick around, then some of these littler things, I don't know, that just makes me sad. That it's not a respected enough industry to warrant the kind of preservation that other industries get.
It's weird because video games are absolutely massive. Like the video game industry is bigger than the music industry, but
it's still looked on by a lot of people, including the companies themselves, as it's just a fleeting moment. Once the PlayStation 5 comes out, who cares about the PlayStation 4? Well, the answer is a lot of people, but Sony doesn't.
Yeah, the Nintendo's kind of, for many years, I think Nintendo got that. I think that they have gone astray from that, but that's probably a conversation for another day. But I do think that the arcade experience it lives on, but it is not it's not recognizable to us. But I can appreciate, and I'm happy that it exists in some ways, even though it's diminishing, right? Sure. And with malls disappearing, the places for arcades, that type of experience has to go to these entertainment centers. It's got to go to bowling alleys, trampoline parks, theme parks, right? Disney and Universal both have on their properties nice arcades. We went recently to in one of our larger cities, Kansas City. We went to a indoor water park thing, Great Wolf Lodge. There's a handful of them across the country. They had a nice little arcade area in there. It was arcade in the same sense that it was, a lot of skee ball machines, a lot of other things, a handful of arcade type games.
Oh, we didn't even talk about skee ball. Wow.
Well, yeah, skee balls. Next week on T-Mag, skee ball episode. This week, Chris and Dave try to solve how you get the 20,000 points. But they do exist, and I think nostalgia is great. But I also think it's great that they got something else. And my son's going to remember other things about arcades. But he'll also remember going to 1984 with his dad, learning how to play Lunar Lander, then saying, "I've got an Xbox at home. What are you doing?" But also appreciating and wanting to go there with his friends, and taking other people there and girls and whatnot, and thinking it's cool and. So he can respect that. So, I think that what we're seeing is generations of the arcade experience starting to emerge. What will the next one look like? And I hope COVID just doesn't kill it entirely. It's like, those millions of people died, but I hope the arcades make it. That sounds, but I hope, like many industries, right? We could talk about many that are teetering. I hope that COVID doesn't kill that experience in the arcade as well.
I hope so too. And I think the fact that a company like Arcade 1-Up could even exist and prosper, that shows you that there's interest in it and that people are still pining for that kind of experience. So I think your point about it being generational as opposed to, well, it's over and the good days are gone, I think that's a valid point. And, it'll exist in some way, shape, or form, even if it just becomes something that they bring out at video game conventions and they set up an arcade room or something like that. So, long live the arcade. I miss Aladdin's Castle. If it were still around, I'd still put $3 into it weekly,
Oh,
which would probably buy me half a game at this point.
$3, yeah, $30. You know where else I used to play a lot of arcade games? The skating rink.
I never went to the skate.
Yeah.
That was not for me.
Those are gone. Those are really gone. So, so what I think that to me, the problem that we solved today, we're trying to work things out. It wasn't so much a problem, but I love the arcade. I will never forget the arcade and the arcade game experiences, those outside of arcades, and how they brought video games to life, and then you brought them home and you could continue that experience. But I do think that social sort of thing, it also lives on in online gaming, which is a totally different thing. But that person to person, real in the room interaction, it continues with our kids today. And like you said, long live the arcade.